Okay, we're also ready to start? Okay, I'm somewhat confused. Do we want to do the roll first or do the oath first? Why don't we do the oath first?
Good morning, Jessica Rosenberg, Deputy City Clerk. Recently, the City Council reappointed Mr. Ralph Ohlers to another 3-year term on the committee. Please stand and raise your right hand and repeat after me. I, and then say your name.
I, Ralph Ohlers,
Solemnly swear or affirm
solemnly swear or affirm
that I will support the Constitution
that I will support the Constitution
and will uphold the laws of the United States
and will follow the laws of the United States
and the state of Florida,
and the state of Florida,
that I will in all respects
and I will do in all respects
observe the provisions of the Charter, observe the provisions of the Charter
observe the provisions of the Charter
and ordinances of the City of Naples,
and the ordinances of the City of Naples.
and will faithfully perform the duties
I will faithfully perform the duties
of the office
of the office
of East Naples Bay Citizens Advisory Committee member.
of East Naples Bay Citizens Advisory Committee.
Thank you.
For my doctor, and I had to take it, and that's why I'm late, and I apologize.
Please.
We have an excused late appearance by Ralph Ohlers this morning. Chairman, if you want to call the meeting to order and do the roll call.
Okay. Jessica?
Member Bowen,
Here?
Member Ohlers,
Here?
Vice Chair Rinaldi,
Here.
Member Shanahan, and Chair Haybrick.
Here. Okay, are there any announcements?
No announcements?
Okay. Do we want to make any changes to the agenda? Okay. Are there any public comments? Okay, does anybody want to move to approve the minutes for the last meeting?
Yeah, I move to approve the minutes.
Okay, I'll second it. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
It passed. Okay, East Naples Bay dredging update. Matt, I guess that's you?
We do have Matt Starr as well as Jeff Tabor here and Lou Gaudio with QE to provide the update.
Good morning, Matt Starr, Stantec Consulting Services. A quick update on the dredging project this morning since we spoke last. QE has moved one canal system south to the canal system between Pelican and Blue Point, which includes the canals of Little Neck, Clam, and Cherry Stone. They've been grinding rock and removing sediment in there the last couple of weeks. They're still using the staging area at the end of Curlew Canal to offload material and haul it off site. So the project is progressing, and really the point of this update now is to let QE have an update on the schedule, the project, and bring any comments they may have to the advisory committee.
Let me make sure I'm turning on the right. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Is that on? Okay, good. Good morning, Lou Gaudio, Quality Enterprises. How are you all? As Matt mentioned, we are. I go by the canal names that we have on our plan sheet, so I'm gonna say we're down to XX as of right now.
Correct.
So
The X canal system includes canals X, Y, Z, and LA, but that's the system between Blue Point and Pelican.
So based on the planned quantities of what we are to do to remove, we're about just about more than halfway in terms of quantity. With those canals that we've done about 1,900 cubic yards of grinding, and that's an approximate number. And then of what we've hauled off, it's probably about 1,400 cubic yards hauled off. So the canals that we're working in right now, they have been, the rock has been ground up, but it just hasn't been hauled out yet. or completely dug out. One of the things that we're working on at the last, and the reason why I'm here today is obviously to talk about what we spoke last time about was payment, in terms of having surveys done and where we stand with that. The last survey that we did have completed was for Canal BBBB. And one of the issues that we're running into is this margin of error that.
Could you let them know what that's called in the lingo that we're using, the name of the canal? Instead of BBBD, what's the name of that? Is that,
This will be the canal between Osprey and Pelican,
okay.
the previous canal.
Okay. All right. So that was the last survey we had performed. One of the things that, as I was mentioning, one of the things that we're running into is with this survey, unbeknownst to us until recently through the surveyor, was a margin of error that they have of about 3.5 to 4 inches when they are done surveying. And the way that the conversation came up about that was on BBBB. The canal was completely grinded, completely cleaned. I had the guys go out there and verify. Not only, as we discussed last time, we've got GPS on the equipment, which allows us to know where we are when we're grinding in terms of elevations. But we also physically check the old-fashioned way, I'll say, to confirm where we are in elevation. So we were pretty confident that we had gotten to where we needed to be by contract. And when they came out, did the survey, they had indicated that there was still about 150 cubic yards, roughly, to still be removed. And just through conversation with them, it turns out that there's about a margin of error, like I said, of about 0.3 of a foot. So in areas that they provided a survey that showed that it was high by about 3 inches, we actually physically went out there and checked with a rod, and it turned out that we were correct in terms of where we were on the elevation. And maybe Matt can speak a little bit more to this in terms of what equipment they use, but in essence, they could go through the canal and survey it, turn right back around, survey it again, and have a completely different result. Again, margin of error is there, but the results won't ever be the same if they do the same survey twice in one day. So that's something that we've been discussing about how to overcome that. What's typical in some dredge projects is that you over dredge in order to make up and be certain that you've kind of achieved your elevation. And we've done that in past dredge projects where you're dredging sand or sediment. When you're talking about grinding an additional 3 inches of rock, you're talking about a whole nother project. And we felt comfortable in the equipment that, excuse me, that we have and the technology that we have, that when we bid the job, we knew we were going to be pretty accurate because of the GPS equipment that we're using. I mean, that's why we buy the equipment and spend the money and invest in that, so that we don't have to over dredge. So again, it's something that we're trying to work through. But if you took the entire project, the entire footprint of the project, and decided to over dredge by 3 inches, you'd be over dredging by about 9,000 yards, which is about 3 times the amount of material that you even have on the job. So again, obviously, in order to give the city the best price possible, we were trying to be as accurate as we could on saying there was no need really to over dredge with the equipment that we're using, because again, we're grinding rock, and we wouldn't want to grind 3 additional inches of rock. Matt, I'm not sure if there's anything that you want to add to that, but that is something that we're trying to get through. And the issue, again, just like we spoke before, and I'll say it again, I mean, we are committed to finishing the project. We're not going anywhere. But the issue that we're running into is, because we can't get a survey that shows 100% complete, I can't get paid. And that's a big problem. So, I mean, just to kind of give you an idea, based on the amount of rock that we have ground and dug out and hauled off the project, based on that quantity, we should have been paid about close to $600,000 we've only been paid $150,000 just for the line item on grinding. And, you know, we calculate that by the truckloads that we remove out, so it's verifiable. But we just don't know how to get around this clause of, you know, having a survey that shows 100% complete, you know?
You know, I have a question on this. If we were doing an elevation certificate on land where water was not involved,
Right.
okay? It's very unusual to have two different people come out and give two different results. Why are we getting what in essence is, you're saying it's one thing and somebody else is saying it's something else? This ought to be a finite kind of a determination, and I'd like to know what's going on here.
Yeah, and in terms of the technology that they use and the sonar that they use, I can't speak to that. I mean, I'm not an expert in that, and I'm not sure if Jeff or Matt are, but I mean, this is coming directly from this, you know, a licensed surveyor saying that, you know, there is a margin of error. And again, I agree with you 100%. On land, you could have 3 different people survey an elevation, and they'll get pretty much the same result. Underwater, it's a little bit different.
I guess the question is, why is it different?
I guess it's because of the type of equipment that they use, the sonar that they use. It's, you know, it's multi-beam.
Thank you, Lou. Maybe I can speak. Jeff Tabor with Stantec. In regards to the survey, let me be clear. It's, number one, it's by design the best survey approach or technique to get an accurate reading for the project. It's very highly accurate. Now, I'll respectfully disagree with Lou. It's not survey error, it's survey accuracy. It can be within the maximum of 0.3 feet, and that's basically my index finger. Inherently, it's because, 1, you're underwater, 2, the tides, the movement of the vessel, the quality of the sediment. So it's up to 0.3 feet. It doesn't mean it's always going to be off that much, and typically it is not off that much. So the survey technique that's being used is highly accurate. That's why it was specified for this project. And in anticipation of the project, within, to remind the board of our process of selecting a contractor, going through, it was explicitly talked about that whether sediment or rock, you should anticipate going deeper, because rather than be chasing small amounts of material, which is what is happening now, there's 7 to 13 yards left in CC, and it's becoming a little bit problematic to get that. I suspect the problem there is because, Lou, not to put words in your mouth, they tried to cut it at 5.4, the exact elevation. Well, if you're cutting it at the exact elevation, then you're going in with a piece of equipment trying to scrape that surface with no allowance below that for sediment to move. That's going to be very difficult to show 100%. So I just want to state that absolutely it's not an error in what's going on. It's survey accuracy, which is something that is not only accepted, but again, the equipment and the technique is what should be used for not only dredging sediment, but rock to ensure that you get exactly what you want. So in any event, I hope I don't want to confuse folks, but I just want to make that crystal clear about what it is. Now, I won't, certainly, Stantec won't argue. They're doing a great job. They're progressing. The technique itself is absolutely grinding rock effectively It's just now a matter of whether you built in, Lou, and I respect your expectation of additional material if you over dredge, but I've done dredging projects and rock removal for 30 years. And over dredging, over cutting is something inherently built in to projects, so you don't get in a situation where you're trying to do it at exactly that elevation. Given the environment you're working underwater, it's very difficult, unlike a terrestrial project. So you over dredge so you can build in for that inaccuracy of even your own equipment isn't within an inch. It's probably 0.2 or 0.3 your equipment that's on the barge. So that's not perfect. So all of those factors you build in over dredging. So from a time, and I'm not certainly going to dictate means and methods, you don't try to get it exact and then run back. It costs you money. It's money and time.
Well, and let me just clarify something. We are over dredging. So after Canal BB, or I'm sorry, CCCC, we did make a correction and did lower the elevation. So we are over dredging in essence. And in terms of the terminology, margin of error, that was exactly what was told to me by the surveyor. There's a margin of error. That's what he called it. So you can call it whatever you want, but it's a margin of error is what he's saying. But we are, and again, if we were talking sand and sediment, it'd be one thing. But if you just purely look at the quantities to over dredge or over remove an additional 3 inches of rock over the entire project, you're over dredging more than contractually what you're removing from the contract. So that would have been a lot more money for the city to pay.
And then I guess my response, respectfully, Lou, is in multiple places within the RFQ and the bidding process, it is bold and underlined that there should be anticipated over dredging built into the project, that should be anticipated to ensure the community and the board get the elevations that, and based on the nature of the project. So, I mean, I understand it's time and money, no doubt, I get that, but it was not only written, but also spoke about as well.
Well, and honestly, I think it would have been a benefit to even have you guys state in the document that the survey that you guys provided actually has a margin of error in it as well. Because that's the same company and used the same method to perform the survey that the bid documents were based off of. So, and listen, we're here to try and figure it out. We're committed to getting the job done. We are out there. We're working. The problem is we're working without getting paid for it. Again, we haven't gotten paid for dredging in 4 months, 3 months, whatever, since the last time that we met. And since then, we have removed a lot of material. So we've got to try and figure out a way to say, hey, if we can do a survey, just like we did with Canal CC, get paid a portion of it. And, what I don't want to do is, and what I've told the guys is, we don't want to continue going south and then having to come back up north to clean up these little areas. We want to get all these canals 100% done before we continue moving south, because it just doesn't pay to have all these little pieces to pick up. So I think with the over dredging that we are doing, that we've been doing, since BB, hopefully that will help and will work. But we just need a little bit of relief on getting payment so we can continue moving forward. And again, I think for CCCC, it was agreed that we got paid 90% of the quantity on that canal. I'd like to do the same with the others, so we can at least keep this going.
Well, 90% would represent full payment for completion. The 10% is the retainage that we're supposed to keep until the end. Isn't that correct?
No, sir. No, you actually, for CC, you approved 90%, and then 10% of that was held in retainage. So you're actually holding 10% after the 90.
I'd like to mention retainage is 5% on
Or
this
5%,
project.
yeah,
just
on
for
this one, you're
clarification.
correct, it was reduced
And
to
it,
5.
and the 90%, was it 90% of the material removed was paid, not 90% of the price for the canal?
Right.
You know, I'd like to go back a moment before we talk about cash, okay?
Yeah.
I can understand in this environment how important cash is, and I don't want to diminish our discussion of that particular item, but I'm concerned about here that we have two different sources taking a measurement, and we have two different sources coming up with a different conclusion. And my question really is, how do we get unanimity so that there's an agreement that between the two parties as to what the real depth is? Because, you know, if we allow 3 inches on one area, are we gonna be asked to do 6 inches in another area, and after that, 9 inches in yet another area? What is the standard that we're gonna employ? You know, at least from my perspective, ever since I've been on this committee, it's always been, I'm not really concerned about how much rock you remove.
Right.
Okay? I'm not, or the weight of that rock. I'm not worried about the sediment either. What I'm concerned about is, are you meeting the dimensions of the depth and the width that is called for in the contract? And, you know, that's contract
Understood.
I'm sure you've gone through 100
Yeah.
times.
Matt, I'm sorry.
You know, I think that's the big thing here.
I was going to say, Matt, it's hard for a layperson to understand the rest of your PowerPoint slideshow, those slides without an explanation. Perhaps you want to walk them through these results from the Morgan and Elkland and explain why they're in the packet and what they represent.
Sure, we can certainly do that. I don't want to stop Martin's conversation just a second. We can certainly get to it when you're done
Okay.
with your comment.
Basically saying is, can we get the two parties who've done a measurement to come together and say, yes, this is the number?
Well, it's the same party too, so I mean, we're using Morgan and Eklund as well. So it's the same, as far as who's doing your survey.
I think what Martin's question is more relating to is not the Morgan and Eklund survey, but you mentioned you had your staff out there.
Oh, right.
Doing checks. You know,
Yeah.
we haven't been provided any of that information to see.
Sure.
And obviously Morgan and Eklund, they do a survey point every 1 foot in every direction in the
Right,
canal, which is
right.
tens of thousands of points. So I don't know if a couple survey rod shots are representative of the entire canal system as a whole.
And what we did was in I believe it was BBBB, since the majority of that was good except for a few high spots, we checked just those high spots. And
Okay.
we didn't obviously do the whole canal because we didn't have to.
Sure.
So,
And regarding the surveys, Martin, yes, there is an inherent, accuracy with the survey. And that 3/10 of an inch, that's up to like 3/10 of a foot. Thank you. 3/10 of a foot is for dynamic marine environments. If you're in the surf zone with a beach where there's waves, when we're in an enclosed canal, there's also a heave, pitch, and roll sensor on the equipment. So if the boat tilts one way or the other, it corrects for that. And that's plus or minus, and I can talk about that on the survey slides here on the PowerPoint. But just wanted to mention that it's up to. But when a surveyor provides a signed and sealed survey, when he puts his stamp and signature on it, just like an engineer and a PE does, this is what we're certifying is the survey, that the information that's out there. It's not an accepted engineering practice to subtract 3/10 of a foot, add 3/10 of a foot. You're manipulating data at that point, and you don't know which way it goes. So when we get the information that's provided, signed and sealed, that's why in the specs we write the information is in situ. It's not, there's no fluff factor, no swell that's been applied. It's just the signed and sealed data. But we can talk about that on the slides here. And we can talk about Canal BB specifically. This is Canal CC that's in between Curlew and Pelican. And bear with me as I step through this here. So we have 3 different images shown. I'll draw your attention to image B that's in the middle. This is the signed and sealed survey from Morgan and Eklund. This says, we went out there, we surveyed it, this is what we will stamp with our signature and license on it. This survey shows that there's about 13 yards, the signed and sealed survey, left in Canal CC. Most of this is near the mouth and near the staging area. There's a couple windrows that are left here near the end. And these cutouts on the template, these are where there's boat lifts that have been built or boats that haven't been moved that are within 10 feet. So this is material that QE cannot physically get from a safety factor. The reason we don't start adding and subtracting 3/10 of a foot, if we look at the image on the top, image A, and this is not an engineering practice, we do not typically do this, but we can cut the data any way we want with our computers. If you add 3/10 of a foot, it shows there's 106 yards left in the canal. If we subtract 3/10 of a foot and look down at item C, we can see there's only 1 yard left. It's a little bit here near the mouth where they're pushing north and south with the equipment. Not a big deal. But to answer your question, Martin, how do we get on the same page? As engineers and scientists and surveyors, when we trade data, it's signed and sealed. We don't manipulate each other's data. So this is what we rely on as the information that's out there. So Canal CC, it's very close, not a big deal there. This starts to get exaggerated a little more when we move down to Canal BB, which is between Osprey and Pelican, that Lou mentioned, he's looking for payment this morning on. The canal actually indicates that based on the signed and sealed survey, which is the image B here in the middle, there's 250 yards left in the canal. There's 733 yards total in the canal. So based on a signed and sealed survey by a licensed surveyor, they've completed 61% of the material in the canal. And again, to reiterate, why we don't add or subtract 3/10 of a foot, if we look at image A and we add 3/10 of a foot, there could be 610 yards left. We know that's not a realistic number that's in there. We look at item C at the bottom. There's 78 yards left in here if we subtract 3/10 of a foot. Again, that's probably not a realistic number either. So we rely on the signed and sealed survey, as I mentioned, from surveyors and to engineers. This is what we accept as the survey. So this indicates there's 250 yards left in CC, in BB. And there, like I mentioned, there's 250 yards left in this canal.
Matt, can I just jump in for 1 second, if you don't mind? So, based on the quantity that we were supposed to remove 733 yards, I
Correct.
believe, is the contract quantity for that canal. Based on the material that we dug out and hauled off the property, and we do that by truck count, we removed 756 cubic yards of material. And what the survey is telling us, and again, there's multiple surveys, but what the sign and seal that came is that, no, we only removed about less than 500 yards. But we trucked off 756 yards. And just to add one other thing, too, when Morgan and Eklund came back to do the survey for BB, they went back into the previous canal and did a survey again because we went back and tried to remove those high spots. Their survey that second time didn't even match the first survey that they did. They actually showed different high spots now. So now we're trying to figure out which high spots to go after and chase. So even their survey, after they do it the same time, can show different values.
I
Matt,
got
could I
to tell
ask
you
a
that
question?
you're losing me a little bit, and I'm just going to tell you why.
Yeah.
You're looking at the weight of the sediment that's being removed from your construction. I can understand that that's your internal process.
When you say the weight, I'm not.
Pardon me?
I think Martin means the truck amount.
Yeah, the cubic yards.
Cubic
Oh,
yards,
okay.
right, yeah.
We were never concerned about the cubic yards because the last time that the canals were dredged, one of the mistakes that they made is that they paid the contractor based upon the weight of the material removed.
Understood. And the only reason why I'm bringing that up is as a reference point, just to say, like, based on the material that we actually have hauled off, that's what we're using just to gauge, okay, where are we with the canal? I'm not asking that it gets paid that way. I'm just trying to use that as a reference point.
I'd just like to mention too, though, Martin, on the material that's been hauled off, that just because there's a truck count, it doesn't tell you where the material comes from, if it's inside, outside the template, below the template. When we looked at Canal C, we wanted to figure out how much material was removed within the template and without the template. And in Canal C, QE actually removed 60% more material outside and below the template than they had to. So trying to do truck counts is not the most accurate representation.
Again,
of a-
for us, it's more of a reference. We know it's not.
Understandable.
We know it's not very accurate. Just like the survey is not very accurate, but we're using that as a gauge for ourselves to say, okay, where are we with quantity on the project?
You know, I can understand and appreciate it, but, you know, I think that our perspective, at least mine from a board thing ever since I've been involved with this, is let's have a template, let's look getting the width, and let's get the
Yeah.
depth, and that's it.
Understood.
And
Yeah.
now, if we have two different parties that are doing two different audits with respect to are we meeting that standard, it would seem to me that before this ever comes to the board for a review, that those two parties ought to get together and decide what the actual results are.
Well, and we have had conversations about that.
And that, I don't know if that's happening or not, but at some point, if they say that they agree, then they got something that they can show this board. But if they're coming to us and saying one is off by 3 inches or 6 inches or 9 inches, whatever it might be, and the other one is saying no, you know, we're not here to judge a difference. We're here to see that this thing is completed according to the contract.
And you know, back to the question, Martin, how do you come to an agreement? Whatever's signed and sealed is what we defer to.
Well, Matt, let me ask you a question. You guys do, I think by contract, we hand you guys a final survey, and then you also have a survey done as well.
When the canal's completed to 100%.
When the canal's completed to
Correct.
100%.
Then we will do our independent.
So what happens if that survey, if my survey shows that it's 100% complete, and then Morgan and Eklund goes in there and shows high spots somewhere?
The contract states that the city's survey supersedes the contractor's survey. So ultimately, the city's survey at the end of the
So
day.
even though I have a signed and sealed contract, which you said is what to go by, you have a signed and sealed contract that shows something different, that's what we have to go by.
And that could be, you know, and
And-
where we
But you
expect.
understand where I'm going with that? Even though I
Yeah,
have a
I-
signed
I
and
have
sealed
a
contract?
question, too,
I mean,
that-
survey?
Yeah, that was one thing that was critical to the board, that the city survey was preeminent and, you know, carried the weight. But I want to back up a little bit and ask Matt a question. When we define the quantities and the contractor specified the quantities in his contract, that was material that was in place, yards in place. Now, when you put them in a truck, everything expands and you get a lot more yardage.
Correct, and that's why we
So-
state in the contract they're in situ volumes. No swell or fluff factor had been.
Right.
Understood.
So when you start putting rock in a truck and you say you have so many yards, those yards are not comparable to the yards that are used in the calculation for what has to be removed. They're two different numbers.
Correct, you're gonna have void space between
Right.
the rocks.
Right. So I just want our board members to understand that. If you've ever had to work with Phil and they're two different numbers, and all contractors that have to deal with that know that.
Jeff, you have anything to add here?
Maybe backing up a little bit, do we have, the initial survey that you bid on was done by Morgan and Eklund?
Correct, and that's the surveyor that QE is using currently as well.
And that's what, and this signed and sealed is Morgan and Eklund?
Correct.
And your on-site surveys with a pole and your GPS data is occasional, but not foot by foot by foot?
Correct. What we're doing is we're spot checking to confirm. So the GPS on the equipment is actually always active as we are grinding and digging.
And how do, we're dealing with water and tides, and there's a standard tide diagram, but then depending on which way the wind's blowing, the water in the canals might be 3 inches higher or 3 inches lower if we have an onshore wind or an offshore wind.
Yeah, I mean that doesn't really affect how the GPS on the equipment.
But how do you normalize the tides at the time you do your GPS and Morgan and Eklund does their GPS?
QE's GPS is tied to a Trimble base station system. It's an RTK system that has elevation built into it. So it kind of takes,
It's satellite-based. so
Correct.
They can
It
tell, they can
corrects
tell
as
where
they
the
work.
water is. Okay,
it
I
is,
understand
but
that.
the accuracy of the Trimble system also is 2 to 3/10.
And then, are you using this Trimble system too?
We are. That is our system.
I see, I see.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay,
And
so
and
we're-
then the the rotting is based off of a benchmark that's set in the canal
Right.
on like one of the seawalls. So that, I mean, in terms of accuracy on the rod, that's
Right.
pretty accurate.
And this is the city's final survey, the signed and sealed, or there's another survey?
This is QE's interim survey. This is a progress survey from QE. This is not paid for by the city at this point in time.
Okay.
Right.
So there's yet to be a third survey
Well, and so
that would be the,
what we
Final.
did was when we were completed with BBBB, or we thought we were completed, that's when before we call the surveyor out, we actually go back into the canal and do some double checks just to make sure that we've gotten everything out, and then we call in for survey. So that's what they came up with, that middle survey.
Right.
That's what they sent, and that's when the conversation started with them was something doesn't seem right because we've gone through there, we've double checked, we kind of have an idea of quantities that were removed, and that's how the conversation started with them.
and is Canal BB the worst of the canals that have been completed?
I
We
would
have
say,
survey variances?
I mean, we've only surveyed 2 canals.
Okay.
CC and BBBB. So I would say yes. When we surveyed CC, I'm just going to call it CC instead of saying CC. When we surveyed CC, it wasn't as bad as this. I mean, I think Matt showed you what CC looked like. It was very minimal in terms of what was left to be done.
Maybe closer to the lower.
Yeah,
bar there.
even better than that. I mean,
I see.
Matt, I think if you flip back to CC, you'll see that that the middle one, right, is what we.
Yep, and like I mentioned, with the material that's left, we did see some changes between surveys. It's right here at the mouth. This is where they're pushing the push boat and the barge and equipment back and forth. So the boat with 2 props is stirring up material. I expect to see it in the front. Lou indicated at the last meeting they'd clean that up at the end of the project. Not a big deal, but we still see some of these high spots in the middle, and these are more like windrows. When the operator's pulling the bucket back, he's pulling it towards the barge and turning the bucket up. And just inherently, that creates a little bit of.
This is after the grinding process, and your
Yeah.
grinding process
Yeah.
might be, 24 inches wide or something, so
That's
it's possible on grinding strips, so
Correct.
your windrow comment is what we're talking about.
And that's what we see that's left here in Canal BB, these windrows that go north and south. I don't doubt that the material's more than likely ground in there. It's loose. It's just left in these rows that are perpendicular to the canal.
So just to let you know, after we're done grinding, we take the grinder off and put a bucket on with a flat plate on it, and we pull the material and dig it out.
Right, right.
So.
And you talked about, after this was happening, you made adjustments to your grinding depth to correct this, and that started when? At Canal DD or CC?
No, we did that in Canal BB. You
made adjustments already at Canal BB.
we have on the model that we build for our GPS has a set elevation on it, but then you could actually set an offset. So you could say, take that final elevation, deduct, 2/10, 3/10, whatever it is, and that's what we have done to adjust for that. So we haven't gone back in and surveyed the remaining canals that we would just in the ZZ through XX, and that's what we're looking to bring them out. But we kind of we've been having this discussion about the survey and just wanted to before we brought
So
them
if you made the adjustment after BB, CC showed a noticeable improvement from, if I recall, my various.
Well, CC was prior to BB.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, even though it was.
What is
right.
that tolerance set to on the equipment? If
I
our-
believe
our
they
target's
they
5.4,
dropped at 2/10.
So it's at 5.6 instead
Yeah,
of 5.4.
Yeah. And again, we're talking about grinding rock. Again, if it was digging.
So you
sediment-
feel that it's solid rock, it's not what the scoop missed after you finish grinding?
It could be a combination. I mean, it's hard to tell. It could be a combination. Like I said, when we had Morgan and Eklund go back into CC after we thought we took out the high spots, their survey showed something completely different. It actually showed more quantity in their second survey than their first.
It did. I think it was 6 yards more, and most of that was near the mouth.
Yeah, so.
Again, the mouth is dynamic. There's currents and
Yeah,
tides
yeah,
out there.
you've got
I'm
some fill,
con-
you've got soft fill movement there.
Sure.
I guess the bottom line is I'm confident that we can work this out in terms of, the surveys and us, what we're doing, what we're adjusting. But again, the language in the contract is what's killing us, is the payment, is having 100%. I can't finance a $3.5 million project to finish this thing.
Well, I
and
understand
not get
that.
paid until the end. I just can't do it. I can't do it.
Well,
What I'm here to ask for is, can we get paid what the surveys are showing? And, we're going to go back and get it out. But I need to keep the thing going.
Well, we've retained you to do the dredging and Stantec to understand that the dredging is done properly. So I think, again, I would agree with you that you two have to come to some sort of recommendation to bring to the board that we feel comfortable in advancing payment or not.
Understood.
We aren't, I'm certainly not the expert or the analysis. I'm asking basic questions, trying to figure out water levels and surveys and
Right.
things like this. So
Right.
I think Stantec needs to do your job and come to some sort of agreement with with QE to say, yes, we think he's operating in good faith, and he will go back and make some corrections, and this is what we recommend.
And I think more of the question I think Lou's trying to pose to the board is that the contract's written right now as a lump sum. Lou's asking basically to get paid by percent complete or by cubic yard, and that's a contractual question. The board worked for a year to develop a lump sum contract. The previous project was done by cubic yard. That's why this is written as lump sum. And that's the question I can't answer. It says lump sum. That's a legal contractual question if the board wants to consider deviating from their contract and paying by cubic yard.
I don't want to deviate from that methodology. That was absolutely critical because the last job failed because we went down that path. So I will never vote for that, but I do understand his need for cash flow. So if we do make an adjustment, I would want to make sure that we maintain a safety margin greater than the last advance that we agreed to.
So Lou, I wasn't around for the last one, but it seems to me, to some degree, you're suffering from the inequities of the last dredger.
Yeah, well,
you've been in this business and done a lot of dredging. Has this come up in other situations and contracts, or why are we unique? Because you've dredged all over the place.
Well, I will say this: we have this is the first dredge project that we've done with rock. Okay, and the reason why, and most of the dredge projects that we have done were with sediment, and we've always been successful at doing them. The reason why this was a unique project to us, and knowing the difficulties that you guys had years ago, was because of the equipment that we have, and the method of removing the rock, and we knew that it would work. I mean, that's why we proposed on the project, because we said, hey, we know that they have failed in terms of methods that they've used before, and obviously to know. Nothing against Stantec or the city, but it was the contractors' means and methods, right? So we knew that we could be successful in doing that. So to answer your question, we've never had to do a rock dredge project. This has been, I mean, we've done lakes, we've done a lot of utility work underwater. So we knew that the method was going to be successful. I mean, we've done several large lakes underwater where we've ground rock. I would say it's similar to this, and we worked off of a barge, but we've just never had the issue with the survey before. So, just to, we've been doing work for the city for 30 years.
Right.
We have never walked away from a project. Our reputation is at stake. You guys are a customer. Most of our work is for Collier County. We live here, we work here. We would never walk away on a project. I mean, that's not the intent here is not to say, hey, we're going to throw our hands up because we can't figure this out. Right. We know we can get the rock out. It's just a matter of how the contract was written to say, hey, you need to have 100% done before we can even pay you a penny. Mm-hmm. So. you know, you guys are holding retainage on us, albeit it's only 5%, and that's because the state statute changed, but it is 5%. And you've got a bond on us. I mean, we've been in the business for over 50 years, and our bond has never been called on a project. And we've done many, many large projects. Dollar-wise, this is not a large project for us, dollar-wise, but there's a lot of resources out there.
Understood. Thank you. I think we need to make some sort of accommodation for timing.
You know, what
I
we're
don't
doing,
know.
though, is that I don't want to mix two things together. I think that one is, what is our standard? Because the whole basis of our contract was, let's meet a standard, and let's not employ the same standard that was used the last time that failed, okay? So I'd like to understand what we're going to do about this whole, audit system to make sure that we get similar results from both people that audited, okay?
Right.
I think that is number one. Number two, the last time that the contract was done, we looked at the weight of the material that was removed. That was a big mistake. And quite frankly, I'm not in favor, personally, of basing a payment based upon the material removed.
And I'm not
Okay,
asking you
wait
to
a
do
minute.
that, yeah.
I'd be more in favor of saying, when something is complete, to do something with respect to payments. So what we're basically saying is, hey, we got two issues. One is, how do we get through this audit thing? And I'm looking at both you and Santec coming together and saying, yes, you have complied, or no, you haven't complied. And then if that's the case, and it goes forward there, and that's done, then I think we can talk about how we can make some payments.
Well, if I
Can
could say something.
interject here too?
Sure.
Because I agree with you, Martin, that we don't want to change the approach. I mean, we worked hard to get that in place. Now, cash flow-wise, they're affected because it's taken them more effort. So if we maintain a margin, but we still keep the priority of the survey that the city gets at the end to prove the deal's done, then he could generate some cash flow, but we're not changing the end deal, which is it has to meet the terms of the city survey.
And if I could just propose something, we're not asking to be paid on a weight basis. I merely brought that up in terms of what we're doing internally to just see how much material we're generating to get out of the canal.
You said weight, but are we still talking cubic yards?
Yeah. Well, I'm not. What I'd like to propose is, Morgan and Eklund provided a signed and sealed survey of what we have done in that canal. Can we base that off? Can we use that as a percentage? For instance, BBBB was a total of 733 cubic yards by contract to remove, correct?
And the survey indicates you've completed 61.7%.
So I would like to say, can we get paid that 61% for that canal? And you're holding 5% on that. And again, we obviously have, I want to, before we continue heading south, the idea is to get Morgan and Eklund back to do another survey. But every time I bring Morgan and Eklund back, even if it's for just a few hours, they charge me close to $5,000 to do a survey, regardless of what the length of the canal is. If I can get, 2 canals in that day, it's that same price. If it's just one canal, it's, so.
I don't see how the committee can approve unless it meets the criteria that was set up initially. And that's our obligation, and that's why we're here. Are you saying that ultimately you're going to meet the criteria, but at the moment you're not there and you want some relief for some funds, but eventually that criteria will be met?
I think I have said that since day one, since the last meeting. Our obligation is to finish the project 100%. It always has been from day one. We will never change that. And Matt, you know, at the end of the day, is going to have a survey that's going to show 100% complete. And so to answer your question, yes, our obligation is to finish the project.
Okay, so whatever that survey, if there's a discrepancy, it's the city's survey that will prevail.
That's correct.
So you're looking for relief is basically what you're saying now.
Yes.
Right, because our contract, Ralph, said that we wouldn't pay until the city survey showed that it was done.
Right.
And he's saying, well, I'm getting there, but I'm not totally done.
Right.
So, you know, I'm open to percentage, but I don't know if I want to go up to the full amount because, you know, we had trouble on the last deal. I don't want to have trouble on this deal.
Yeah.
You know, even on
with
the
that.
Now, I had a general question too
Yeah.
for you, because a lot of the work that's being done here is really dependent on the quality of the people that are in the field. What can you tell me about your staffing, and have they been the same guys all along, or what's happening there?
They have. I mean, I could have Matt speak to that, and your field inspector isn't here today.
So I'm really asking about the learning curve. Do you feel like, you know, your current staff out there has really mastered what they need to do going forward, so you're going to get better, or is this going to be constant all the way through?
The getting better was the adjustment on the overdredge. In terms of being able to use the equipment that they use to get to a certain elevation that's shown on the GPS, they have always been able to do that. The adjustment was really made internally to say, okay, you know, let's overdredge more than, you know, than the template that we have to get to, so that when the survey comes back, it'll show 100%.
So are you telling me that when you bid on this contract, the management should have put in a bigger factor?
I'll tell you that I'm the one that bid this project myself, okay? And when I looked at it, again, if I overdredged 3 inches on this project for the entire square footage of the template of all the canals, we would, if you calculate it, it's close to 9,000 cubic yards. Okay, it would have added a ton of money to the project and a ton of time too.
Right, but if the sediment's not the issue. It's always been the rock.
Correct.
And the most northern canals are the real land. When you get to Royal Harbor, that was mangroves. It's probably going to be a lot easier. So when you make that comment, I'm really thinking, well, you really needed to work on the rock part when you did your calculation, because that's where the risk was.
Well, the majority of it is rock. I mean, when you look at it, the majority of it is rock.
But not south when you get further.
I mean, there's rock south. It's just not in as big a quantity as it is up north. So,
I wanted to make,
and if I could just say one more thing, I'm sorry, didn't mean to. You know, one of the other items that's hurting us is our mobilization. Okay, the contract has held us to. We had $750,000 in mobilization of equipment. Okay, we couldn't bill for, I think, 10%. Correct me if I'm wrong, until like 25% of the project was complete, and then another 25 after 50% was complete.
So
I forget what the
mobilization is paid, 25% is paid when 10% of the work is complete. That first 25% payment has been made. The next 25% is paid at 25% completion, and then the final 50% is paid at 50% completion.
So even though I have all this equipment that I brought out there, all this manpower, I've only been paid 25% of my mobilization costs.
Which was $750,000.
Correct. Correct. Yep.
I just wanted to add a couple of comments. One, the coming to an agreement on survey. We think we're done. We spot checked. You're showing. That's very common in dredging or rock removal projects. I'm very confident we can come to an agreement in the end on what technique or what data is appropriate and accurate and shows the project's done. That won't be an issue. Obviously, as Commissioner Rinaldi said, it's, again, not speaking for Lou, they want to not wait until they demonstrate they're 100% done a canal. As they're progressing, they want to be paid for a portion of the work completed. We can take the survey information and do that and recommend to you, we feel comfortable BB has done X amount now, and then potentially pay them. But the way the contract was written by design is you don't see any money, contractor, until you demonstrate it's 100% complete. So they're asking for a middle ground, correct, Lou? To just say, we'll show you, and the engineers for the city will agree, we're 61.7% done, BB. Can we receive payment for that or something
Correct.
close to that, right? So I just wanted to say, coming to agreement on what a survey technique and what rules are not, we will absolutely do that. And we do that on every job and have a recommendation. It's whether or not that would dictate a payment release. And that's really not up to us. It's up to the board because the contract is very clear. Nothing gets paid until you demonstrate 100% done. And they're wanting essentially partial payment as they progress. So,
You know, I want you to help me out with this just for a moment, okay? Let's talk about the money after we finish this thing up. I think that with respect to these audits, if your audit shows one result, and Centex shows another result, Centex obviously overrides everything, okay? But what we're basically saying is, before we have a board meeting, okay, let's get the two parties together to agree upon what it is. If they both agree, then that's an issue off the table.
Right.
But I think that you can understand, our emphasis has always been meeting a standard, okay? And if both parties say the standard is met, then that takes the issue off the table. Now, can we make that happen?
I believe, just to make it clear too, we're not asking for any relief on changing the template out there. I'm not saying to you, hey, you know, can you allow us to not go to minus 5.4 and go to minus 5.2? That's not the question.
I understand that.
I just want you to know.
Here we're
that.
having a meeting.
Yeah.
Saying, you know, we have two different surveys, and those two surveys are different, you know? I think that that's unacceptable. Okay?
well, just clarification. We have a survey signed and sealed, as Matt indicated, by a surveyor that we've used, and they're using the same one. And then we have the contractor indicating they've done some spot checking, may or may not be done by a licensed surveyor, that may show some differences. We haven't looked, nor have we went with them on site while they do those spot checks before. But again, this is very common in dredging projects. And typically our stance, unless there's overwhelming, which is not typical, evidence by a contractor, is what we put in place rules. Our survey technique, how we want it done, and how it shows is going to dictate. We'll stand behind that. That demonstrates to me and the company as the engineer of record, it was done correctly. We come to you. Are we willing to look at data or go on site with them? Absolutely. To see if something they have may or may not show it's done and we're saying it's not. We will work that out internally. Absolutely.
Okay, I think, you know, the real question becomes, how much of a tolerance are we gonna have? If you find that we're off by 3 inches, you know, I think everybody can probably agree that that's not material and not of a concern. But if we go down that slope, what happens if we're off 6 inches or 9 inches or even a foot? You know, at what point does it become, what point when the differences are significant, do we start saying, hey, we gotta go back and get this thing done right?
Martin, I feel like you're jumping ahead a little bit because we're not going to change the standard.
That's right.
For the canal and Matt is going to get the final survey that the city employs to meet the standard. Okay, so we're not changing that. The question is how he's going to get his cash flow, because our contract says he doesn't get any money till we're totally done with the deal. So he wants to get a progress payment. I'm okay with that, but we're totally working on your surveys for the progress payment. Am I correct, Matt?
Correct. It is the same surveyor that Stantec would use.
The same survey, but it's his numbers, okay?
Correct.
Right.
Right, and just
So-
sorry, we do take their data. They give it to us as well, and we're very appreciative you're using the same surveyor that we've recommended. We do take their data, and we run the calculation to present these figures and volumes that that still exist within the canal. So
Right.
just want to make sure
And-
we're heavily involved in that.
Okay.
They don't just send us, we think we're this % done. We're checking their information and really telling them you're 61%.
Right,
point
but
seven.
there's always pluses and minuses. We're
Correct.
not totally done with the deal. I want a margin in there. You know, you calculate 61%. Well, I'm not ready to support 61%. I mean, I would support something with an extra margin in there because we're dealing with preliminary still. And the whole idea of the original contract was to keep the contractor in the deal until each canal was finished. So progress payment, adjusting that, I'm okay with it, but not to 61%. Not on the next canal, 71%. Not on the next canal, 90%. I want to keep a margin.
Well,
Can I propose, if it's okay, because what I'd like to do, if it's okay, is, try and set something up so that we don't have to keep doing this every month, right? And just going forward. And I understand where you're coming from in terms of a percentage of that survey. So if we turned in a survey to Matt, is it acceptable to pay 90% of what that survey showed? So for instance, if we showed 61% complete, would you, and remember, you're still holding 5% on top of that, would you be acceptable to holding or to paying 90% of that 60%?
Well, it would depend if we ended up with every canal only partially done. I really would
I
have
understand.
trouble with that.
Well,
so a blanket,
Yeah.
we're going to do that. If it was just up to me, I'd say no, because we can't have every canal partially done and, advance to that stage. We need to make sure that the project's going to finish.
I understand that.
Can we then basically say, first of all, I want to stay with the standards. I never wanted
Yes.
to change the standard. I want to just say
Right,
that
and
right off
we're
the bat.
actually not going to
Okay, but
change that. Yeah.
can we basically say that we only will give this advance where there's been, a significant amount of work done on a canal? In other words, when a canal's half done, then we can start considering giving an advance in that situation?
Yeah, I'd like to keep at least 10%. Like if
Yeah,
you're
and hold
saying
back at 10%.
61% done, I'd want to fund maybe 51% or 50%.
Yeah, but we don't consider, what happens if a canal is only 20% done? Do we give an advance in that case?
You wouldn't ask.
Honestly, I wouldn't ask.
He wouldn't ask, but if we set up a formula, then maybe he could
If
do
if we
10%.
went out there and dredged and had a survey done and found that we owe only 20% complete, something's wrong. So I mean, we honestly wouldn't.
No, but where do you, the problem is, where do you draw the line?
Understood. And I agree. Maybe, like you said, if it's more than 50% done, I'm hoping that that's not the case. I'm hoping that as we get further south, the quantity is obviously not as much. These are where the quantities are, right here in these big canals. So,
So we've got three canals now, CC, BB, and AA.
well, we haven't performed a survey yet on I'm going to call them the finger canals coming off of that. We haven't done a survey on yet because we were kind of still working through this.
On AA.
Is that A?
Canals X, Y, Z, and AA.
Yeah.
Y, Z, and AA have been ground. Some of the material's been removed. The QE is still working in XX around station 150. So they're still performing the work. So until the work's completed.
Yeah,
They're not,
I would say you probably have another week or two before we could actually have that entire area surveyed.
so only 2 canals have been surveyed so far. The third set of canals, they're still working in there.
Yeah.
Well, basically, the payment, the additional payment you're asking for is on the 2 canals that have been surveyed.
Well, so for CC, the first canal that we did, that we already got paid 90% of what we completed on the survey.
Okay.
And that was it. We haven't gotten paid anything after that.
Is that, so that's the 150 plus the mobilization of the 600 you're saying? Earlier you-
Correct,
Okay.
correct, yeah. And so really today would be, what can we get paid for BB based on the survey that we have? Now, the intent is when Morgan and Eklund comes back to do, or before they come back, we're going to go back into BB and try and get what they see as the high spots in there out.
Okay, you are going to go back at this point, you're willing to go back or planning to go back and make corrections on BB?
My idea is not to move. I don't want to continue moving south
Right.
until we get 100% on these few canals. And again, this is where the majority of the material is.
Right.
But what I don't want to do is head south and knowing that we have things to go back and clean up. So the idea is not go any further south than AA right now. Get all of these cleaned up 100% and then move south.
I think that makes sense, and I'd be comfortable with something like, Mike, your proposal of paying, 90% of the percentage that's been removed and get QE some operating funds here. We've been working on this for now, 3.5 months?
We've been working on it since December.
We're
in the field, so.
we're at week 32 of 52.
Yeah.
I would just make a comment about the payment. If we're talking 61.7%, just so everybody can agree on the same page, that's based off the signed and sealed survey.
Yeah.
So if we're gonna move forward and accept a partial payment, I think we need to come to an agreement that the signed and sealed survey is what holds. and the
That's
plus or
exactly.
minus
That's
3/10.
exactly what I did say. Yeah.
Then
we
the
would
plus
go
or
off of
minus
that.
3/10 is,
Understood.
that's understood, but we rely on the
Yes.
signed and sealed survey. If we're gonna start talking percentages here for a payment.
With the condition that, as you said, Lou, you're going to go back and, before we move south, we'll build these to 100%.
That's correct. Yes. Yep.
Does anybody want to put forth a proposal here so that we can get this thing done?
I'd make a motion that we'd fund 50% on that specific canal where we have the data.
I would be prone to seconding that. All in favor?
Can
Aye.
I make clarification? Is it 50% of the work completed or 50% like you're subtracting 11%? So they're getting 50% of the total payment?
Well, you're telling me there's 61% completion in that
Correct.
canal, okay? And I'm saying I'll fund 50% of what we said we'd pay.
Total canal?
For that canal.
50% of the 733 cubic yards.
Okay, just want to make sure. Okay.
Canal BB was $348,507.50.
Correct.
Yeah. I without having the numbers in front of me.
Okay.
I believe that's right.
How do you feel about that, Lou?
How do I feel about it?
Yeah.
I mean, I'd like to get more, but it's better than getting zero.
Well, so that basically, based on his numbers, it gets you another 167 or so.
Just so you know, there's ancillary items that get paid as well. There's survey that have nothing to do with this. That might bring us to a point on the percent complete to date that we might be able to bill a little bit more on the mobilization. So the overall payment may be a little bit more than that, which is a good thing.
Well, I guess, again, not having been here for the last one, I think you're, to some degree, our current contractor is suffering under the poor job of the previous contractor that,
Yeah.
if I remember right, just walked off the job without ever completing it.
Yeah, I wouldn't really characterize it like that. I think the initial contract had many flaws in it. And I think the folks that were on the committee really wanted to tighten the deal and make it very straightforward. And that's what we did. Now, the job is turning out to be difficult inflation. We're all kind of tuned into that. So I'm okay with loosening the progress payments, but not changing the deal.
Gotcha.
And
I'd
we
agree with
understand
that.
that.
And-
We
And
understand
I think we're dealing, I guess from what I've seen between Stantec and QE, that we're dealing with a very effective job, much more effective than the one 8 or 10 years ago. And I'd like to, get QE some wiggle room here.
Yeah. We appreciate that. I mean, I'm not going to speak for Matt, but we know that the process is working. We know that we're able to do what the job calls for. I mean, we are removing the rock, so
Right. And
that's
if we're
that's a
going,
good thing.
if we're going ahead on this, if we agree to 50%, I'd like to see QE and Stantec agree to some progress reporting back to our committee on a month-to-month basis so that this process can continue and you don't have to come back in every month and plead again.
I think Martin asked for it last time to come, and I don't have an issue coming.
And we're completely on board with that. Just as because I'm a calculator guy, engineer, just so you know, paying 50% of the work completed, or 50% of that canal, is essentially 90% of the work completed. It's the same, I calculated it's the same number, essentially. So you're arriving almost at the same approach as you did for CC, just so that's clear.
The way the dollars work out.
Well, right. I mean, it's paying 50% of the total canal is the same just by your 50% of 61. You're paying 90% of the 61%.
Sure, and I
So
think
you're kind of landing on the same
Yeah,
things
understood.
we've been bouncing around, but just not to push one way or another, but we.
Yeah, and I don't know what that brings us to on contract total to be able to maybe build some more of the mobilization, but we'll take a look at that and see if it brings us close to that next level.
Yeah, once we get to 25%.
Yeah.
Yeah, because right now we're based on survey, we're at 19.7% complete. So we'd have to see what
Well, and let me ask you, the 25, I forget how it's written, but 25%, is that based on build to date? Because that's typically the way it's done.
And during the first payment, we worked with QE on that.
Right, yeah, because
we can add some of the turbidity
right,
monitoring.
exactly.
hauling.
That's what I'm thinking. It might be
Basically,
close to.
It should, I mean, we can talk about that for the next
Okay.
progress payment. But I think what Jeff was alluding to was just coincidentally, it's 90%, but the payment for Canal CC, that was 90% of the volume completed, which is a little bit different than the motion that's being requested here, just to make sure we're all on the same page, but it coincidentally came out to 90%. But basically, this motion, as I understand, is for 50% of the lump sum payment for Canal BB.
That's correct, yeah.
Is that
Well,
correct?
I'm not.
That's the way I understand it too. But
And
it's
we're only making an adjustment on that one canal, so next month, when we get our report, we'll see how everything's going, and hopefully
That's right.
things are better. Great.
Lou, in the next month, would you plan on going back to the prior canal and doing some cleanup? Or is
Yeah,
that
so-
further down the road?
No. So when's your next meeting?
And June 20th, I think?
Yeah, I think
It might be close. So by June 20th, we'll probably have AA through XX completed and it's probably surveyed. And we are going to go back to BB right after that, but I don't know if we'll have a survey done prior to the next meeting for that.
QE's recent schedule update indicates they'll be back in Canal BB on June 15th.
I see.
Yeah.
So
So-
it'll be in process. Huh?
Yeah, it might, and then, when they come out and survey, if they survey today, we actually don't get their data for probably 3 or 4 days.
Gotcha.
And then that data is handed over to Jeff and Matt, and it takes them a few days to actually, crunch the numbers as well, so, yeah.
So we'd look for in the June meeting that if we went ahead and made this payment today in the June meeting, we'll have seen you go back and do your backtracking and have the surveyor show some progress on that. So that would be in good faith, from my understanding.
So in the
what we're talking about here.
Yeah, for your June meeting, I should have a survey for AA through XX, but will be in BB physically,
Yep.
working.
Doing the
but
cleanup.
won't have a survey.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. I'd be in favor of seconding the motion that Mike made, if we can clarify it to everybody's satisfaction.
You know, I'll say that my only concern is that we're basing the completion based upon what was removed, not the percentage of the work that was actually completed to get to our final point. I don't know how to do that, and therefore, I'm willing to agree that we make the interim payment based upon what was removed.
And this interim payment would be a one-time, this meeting payment, and we'll reassess what we want to do at our June meeting based upon Lou's backtracking and progress.
Right.
Make sense?
Makes sense. Everybody agree?
I agree.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, unanimous.
Thank you, guys.
Lou, I
appreciate
want to, while you're up at the podium, is your mic on, by the way?
I think it is. I see a red light here.
Oh, okay, good. You know, one of the things that I've noticed during these meetings is that we're concentrating on the canals where the work is being done. And I would just like to see from you, we had an original plan of how all this whole project would start and when it would end, and we had start and end dates by canals. I would like to see an overview of where we stand at the next meeting, okay?
Sure.
Your bar chart,
Yep. And so we update that. We do update that for Matt. As a matter of fact, we just submitted an update this week. I believe Jack sent you an update.
Yep, Jack sent it yesterday, and that's for
Yeah.
the June 15th.
So right now we are projecting, and remember we had this conversation last time, right? And
Right.
kind of talk about productions, and it's kind of it's hard to definitively figure out exactly where you're going to be, but based on what we're showing right now, the last meeting that we had, we were showing early December completion. The schedule that we just submitted, I think, is like 2 weeks beyond that right now.
It's around mid-December.
Mid-December.
Shows right now.
And that's just, the other thing is that's based on now taking some time to go back to the canals to do what we're doing there. You got to remember, what we're trying to do is to always stay active. And what I mean by that is if I have the surveyor come out to do a canal, remember, it probably takes 3 to 4 days to get his information back, then get it to them. We don't want to just sit there for 3 to 4 days guessing on what the survey is. So we move on to the next canal to try and keep the motion going and continue grinding. So, but now we have to go back, so that eats up a little bit of time.
You know, I think that everybody's looking at this project saying, we had a start date, we had a planned end date. And I think at the next meeting, I'd certainly like to see this kind of granularity.
Yeah.
But I'd also like to know what's happening to that end date and what are the causes if there is a difference.
I mean, the causes to us is we're out there spending more time and more money to us. I mean, it doesn't cost you any more money, but it's certainly costing us more money. In terms of to you guys, we're going to be in some of the canals longer than what we anticipated.
Okay.
Could the city, Katie or somebody, send us, Matt, if you could get that updated bar chart with end dates, could you get that to us,
I
email
have it.
through the city?
I can certainly provide it to Katie, and she can send it to the committee.
Thank you.
Anything else?
That's it.
Okay. Thank you, guys. Appreciate your time today.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Okay. Next item is a budget review.
Yes, the budget has been provided for your review. This is as of March of '22, so quarter two. Nothing in particular to highlight, just per usual, at the bottom of the expense report, you'll see the itemized expenses to date. So for QE and Stantec, what has been allocated to those line items per date. So unless there's any questions.
Do we need to approve this?
You do not. It's
Okay,
just for your review
So
and
we
records.
can move on to the next item.
And just one clarification, the next meeting we have scheduled is June 21st, which is a Tuesday.
Okay.
So,
Katie, just one thing, when you poll the people, the members, after you understand that there's a quorum, can you just confirm that the meeting will take place?
absolutely,
Okay,
yes.
good. All right, let's go on to the next item, member comments. Anybody have any comments? Okay, I move that we adjourn.
Say
All approve?
Aye.
aye.
Aye.